Partner Up. I'm wearing my favorite shirt again. This is Michelle's seen this one too many times. Nobody cares, work harder. And excited to be back with you this week. I've talked a lot about how there's no definitive work on partnerships, but there are a few seminal works that have started to kind of come across my radar. So we have one of the authors of one of the key books. There's a very small number, Mr. Mark Sochan here. But before we hop into the guest, Michele, we have some news, which is some crazy news by the time this airs. And it's a little kind of sad that as of recording this pod, it's like my last official week at Drift. So still co-hosting together, but not working in the trenches like we have for the past 4 years.
Yeah, super bittersweet. You have been my partner in crime for the last 3.5 years, so it'll be tough to see you go, but I'm excited for your next venture, which we will probably talk about a little bit later. But I think this is a massive opportunity for you, and excited to continue to learn with you through this podcast and this ecosystem. So it's been great. I'm excited for you.
1,000%. I'm excited to get back into the entrepreneur roots. I've hinted towards that I think partner leaders can be the next wave of entrepreneurs, and that's my early background. So I won't drop the news on this podcast, but you will see me as a co-founder of a new venture, and there will be a big partner focus in terms of that next role. So excited to hop in and then talk about probably my favorite part of partnering. Just did a Cloud Software Association masterclass on this, which is strategic partnering. And I have the book right here. And then now we're going to bring in the amazing author of The Art of Strategic Partnering, Dancing with Elephants. Mark, welcome to Partner Up.
Well, thank you. Nice to meet you, Jared, and nice to see you, Michele.
Thanks for coming on, Mark.
Yes. I say it's my favorite part because maybe I'll frame, I think today, obviously the book title kind of gives away a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. Dancing with Elephants too kind of positions that, you might be in this David and Goliath situation, so to speak, right?
Exactly.
And I've always been in startups, so I've always kind of lived in that world, right? I haven't been at big companies and partnered with other big companies. So I loved the framing and kind of how you put the book together. But the reason why I think strategic partnerships are just such a keystone or cornerstone of a company's go-to-market really starts from your entire ecosystem kind of starts around that massive big alliance there. And then you can kind of have more tech partners that fall through from underneath that, more customer relationships, perhaps channel relationships or service relationships. That's kind of like my viewpoint on why getting the strategic partner right might have outsized effects to getting 50 other smaller partners right. So before we dive into kind of like the timeline of like how to really dance with these elephants, Mark, maybe give your perspective for how you might talk to a CEO, because you're a managing director at CEO Quest, right? And you help companies kind of figure out this problem. How do you talk to your clients about why strategic partnering is perhaps the cornerstone of building an ecosystem strategy?
Well, I love talking to CEOs and executive teams about their strategic partnering strategy because I have personally lived through a number of startups that have had tremendous success, created a 10x value bump, and ultimately successful M&A acquisition because they had a strategic partnership strategy at the core of what they did. And I wrote the book, The Art of Strategic Partnering, Dancing with Elephants, because I wanted to share this topic, which I don't think is well known by a lot of CEOs. And basically, what's not known is how much impact the largest elephants in your industry can make in your business, way more than a smaller mid-sized company.
So tell me how, like, if a company's coming to you and saying, hey, we're trying to figure this thing out, they come across your desk and you're going to share some of those stories. What's the framing that you need to align on with that executive team of like, hey, you're going to work with me. You need to understand that this is at X or Y level of importance. And here's why. How do you level set on gaining that kind of alignment before, someone's like, hey, like we just need a partnership with Salesforce, like figure it out, partner people. Like they come to you because they want to elevate, presumably, the level of importance that partnership might have. How do you go about having that conversation with the executive team?
Well, you bring up a great problem. I was talking to David Weir at Bessemer Ventures, and he said, Mark, typical problem we see is most CEOs, they're product people at heart, and they've done a tremendous successful job of building up the first few key critical customers. And then they get to Series C, and the board says, okay, we got to scale. Go get us a bunch of partnerships. But the CEO, who's a product person at heart, they don't know anything about alliances or strategic partnerships. So they hire a VP Alliances, and the goals are wildly out of sync and out of alignment. And then, there's a big mess at the end. So the better way to do it is you get your management team together, your key stakeholders, and you do what I call a blue sky exercise. You say, okay, if we could have any partnership we wanted to, which are the blue sky partnerships? Which are the ones that would really move the needle for our company? Which are the ones would give us, 10x value bump in our valuation, would get our investors excited, get the analysts on board, and the customers would see us as a safe choice to buy from. So the first step is just getting the key stakeholders on the same page about really envisioning what are those big partnerships that would really make a big difference.
And I think you start that journey, once you kind of have that blue sky exercise in front of you, maybe it's a part of it or it's a prerequisite to it, of identifying so you said 10x, value would get people excited, but maybe it's a step before or a step after. Why are we doing this from an executive standpoint? So there's a couple different ways. The way that I typically think about it is from a market, competitive moat or competitive differentiator, right? It's a way to surround ourselves with someone bigger that can prevent either the incumbents from coming down to us or the upstarts disrupting where we're at. Typically, what do you find is the way that you get that alignment on why strategic partner? Obviously, there's the economic benefit that might seem evident to you, or perhaps me or Michele, if you've seen some of this as well. And Michelle's given a talk on this topic too. How do you level set on the why? Because I feel like that, absent that, everyone has different ideas of what the strategic partner might mean.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. You got to get everybody on the same page about the why. And here's my take on the why. The first is most startup companies, you got zero brand, you got zero credibility. Customers don't know who you are. You've got literally pretty limited resources, especially on the marketing side. So it's not like you can go spend $1 million on a big advertising campaign. So how do you go get the leverage? Well, one of the best ways to get leverage is you go strategically partner with the biggest elephants in your industry. So the Microsofts, the Amazons, the Salesforce, the ServiceNows, those are the guys who have a big brand, have large customer base, and if you could figure out a way to strategically partner with them, you automatically get access to that world. You get that brand enhancement, you get that market visibility, you get access to the customer base. So that's the why, getting access to the customers, getting market visibility and awareness.
So once you've decided on who those key partners are, Mark, where do you go from there? You just mentioned, right, you're a small startup, you're a small fish in a big pond. How do you get these guys to even pay attention to you? And how do you present the value proposition that can be jointly had between the two?
Well, great question, Michele. First thing I'll tell you, don't start at the partner organization. I just did a podcast with the Partner Strategy Network that I do with Wesley Coelho. And we just did this podcast about never talk to the partner alliance people. And I don't mean it in a bad way. It's not that the partner alliance are bad people, but at the big companies, the partner alliance people are there to control things, to be gatekeepers, to, make you jump a bunch of barriers. And ultimately, you're just trying to get access to the executives who can actually make a decision. So my suggestion is, if you can, go first to the product people, chief product officer, VP product management, director of product management. Go to the people who own the product line, who own the big strategy for the company, and make a pitch of how your startup has an incredible innovation or fills some key hole or missing gap in their strategy that gives them a major competitive advantage. So for most startups, what you're offering the big guys is you're offering an innovation leap start, an opportunity to leapfrog the competition.
So this is where I've brought this book up a couple times, and I don't know why I keep referencing it because I don't think it's that good. I think your book's a little bit better, Mark, is The Sumo Advantage. But I really loved how he talks about you have to be an entrepreneur to win these types of relationships. And what you just said is kind of indicative of that same perhaps truth that I think might exist, in that you're trying to go in with these product people, but if you don't have an idea or some thesis or some hypothesis that you've tested, and some sort of proof on, like, here is the baseline of better together, you're not going to get their time, right? So going into that meeting with the product org outside of partnerships, typically are you helping companies identify, or do you have a framework for going, hey, here is that, 1 + 1 = 3, or because I feel like if it's not the CEO, if it's not the founder, if it's not that entrepreneur, and it's just a hired partner gun, they might be going in trying to get the relationship, but not have the secret sauce. What I've called the black swan moment, but it's a direct rip off of Chris Voss from Never Split the Difference. How do you help companies or guide people through, like, hey, before you go get that meeting with the CPO, you better have something good to talk about, which isn't your small company. Like, what's she going to care about? How do you go about building that or guiding companies through that process of identifying why should they care?
Well, you hit the nail on the head, which is it's not about you. Nobody cares about your small startup company. You got to do your homework about, for the elephant, what's the major problems that they're facing. So you've done your homework and you've figured out, okay, we know that competitively they have a huge gap in this area. They got particular, one of their arch enemy big competitors are breathing down their space, or they're trying to crack into this new market. And you're going to come there and present on their terms and their language of how they can do this. So absolutely, it's all about brainstorming ahead of time and being very clear about what's the value that you're going to bring to them. And in this exercise of creating the top 10 strategic partner priority list, I evaluate all the partners on 3 dimensions. Obviously, the value that they could bring to us, scale of 1 to 10. But more importantly, on a scale of 1 to 10, realistically, how much value do we bring to them? Okay. If we're only bringing like a 2 out of 10 value, I'd say go focus somewhere else. And then the third is kind of a realistic assessment of, okay, how difficult is it going to be to execute this partnership? I remember doing a deal with Oracle years ago, and we got the deal done, but that's not their model. Versus there's other companies like Salesforce that really have a deep partnering model built in, where they're trying to build out that ecosystem. So getting really clear about what's that value that we can bring to them that help them achieve their strategic goals.
Typically in that conversation, I'd love to maybe dive through an example. Like, I'll share one on my side and see if one comes to mind for you. Like in the Marketo and Drift partnership, which turned into the Adobe and Drift Alliance, there was that black swan moment. The thing that was true that no one recognized as true, that was like a big aha moment. I remember Jill Rowley and Bobby Napoltonia, who's been on the podcast and is kind of like a friend mentor of mine, and some of the team at Marketo and myself, like, we literally high-fived at the table, which was really awkward and weird because that like never happens in real life. Like, it was like something out of a stock photo, I think. But there was literal high fives across the table at this conference, because we realized that what we did for them was their individual contributors on the CSM side, that we were the number one driver from an integration standpoint of net dollar retention, because we added more contacts to the database, which allowed for, so it wasn't that we were just aligning to top level strategic objectives, it's that we could go all the way down to the individual contributors that would be responsible for this, and their core metric, right, the persona of like, okay, here's the 150 people that really need to activate this, they're already aligned. And that's the stage where I felt like the dynamic changed. And it went from hardcore negotiation about certain points to let's get this done. Do you have an example or a story? Because I feel like that's like the thing that we need to get more stories out there for the executives to like see these things. Do you have a story or an example that might demonstrate, hey, okay, here's how we got to that aha moment?
Yeah, I think of a couple of stories. I mean, first off, one of the tips and tricks that I give to CEOs is the right number of strategic partnerships is any number except for one. And that often surprises people. And the reason I say it's any number than one is because you want a portfolio approach. It's such a power dynamic imbalance when you're the startup and you're dealing with this mega multi-billion-dollar company, that one of the ways these guys often respond more to the competitive pressure. And so the fact that you can say, for example, I was doing a deal with SAP years ago, and I had trouble getting access to SAP. But when I got access to some of their competitors at the time as PeopleSoft and Bond, suddenly I got the meeting with SAP. Suddenly I was a lot more relevant because they saw that I was doing stuff with their direct competitors. So that's that competitive leverage, I think, is really important. That helps you create more leverage and carry a bigger stick than you would if you were just on your own. It gives you more credibility. And as far as the aha moment, I don't know that I've had a high five slapping meeting. I wish I did, but I tell you, I sense in the meeting, you sense when you're going from they're being skeptical. I call it trying to pass a sniff test. You know, you're that first meeting, 30 minutes, and I'm always trying to just hit to the high value stuff. And as soon as they start asking questions, that's where I know, okay, that's my high five moment. It's like the tables have turned, and now it's a conversation that we're having versus me just pitching and, and waving my arms. And I also ask straight up, I say, did this resonate for you? You know, is this hitting on any of the topics of interest to you? Because I see a lot of mistakes where CEOs or companies, they'll talk and talk and talk and talk, and they don't ask questions. They don't validate and say, is this important to you guys? Is any of this resonating for you? And so if nothing else, if you can leave the meeting, and even if you got shot down, if you can learn a few things about what they didn't like, then you can tune it up and get better next time you talk to the next partner.
Right. In that kind of model of determining the aha moment and being at the table, so to speak, we're kind of talking about the business case that's going to get everyone aligned to term sheet, so to speak, and then obviously contracting is almost like it should be done from a business standpoint because you have the executive buy-in. You mentioned in the book kind of like a brief hierarchy of like low value to high value. So like at the bottom rung is low value would be like, maybe like co-marketing, right? So like lots of companies co-market with brands that are, similar to them, but aren't competitive just because it's easy. There's a bit of an ego trap, right? Like you both bring leads to the table and so what? No harm, no foul. But at the highest end,
you do a co-branding thing and you hope the other guy does all the work and brings you leads, and no one brings leads for anybody.
Right.
That's, usually the reality.
We've done a lot, and I've seen that be successful just from we're in a category that's wider than the category we're in. So let's say account-based marketing. So we're like conversational chat. We have an account-based play, but we're not the ABM thing. We can go talk with people in, account-based marketing where it's not competitive, it's complementary. And, we have integrations with those people. So that's simple, but it's not a strategic partnership. It's kind of like low value, easy, no big deal. But at the other end of the spectrum, you mentioned OEM partnerships, right? Like the degree to which it might be powered by or gray label, perhaps white label. We don't need to debate that. To me, if you're in this hyper growth or scaling phase, the friction that you typically run into is like, let's say you could negotiate the perfect deal and do this OEM partnership. There's going to be skepticism from that VP of sales or that CRO or that CMO and be like, how are you not going to eat the sales team's lunch on this? How are we not going to compete with each other? So if OEM is kind of like the highest rung of that value chain, how do you go about figuring out, like, before you come in here, like, hey, are we willing to seed that space or, work around that? What are some of the tips or advice that you have for, if OEM or distribution, right? I mean, that's one form of distribution kind of at the highest order, isn't viewed combatively by the rest of the management team.
Yeah, it's a great point, and it's usually one of the things that does come up is a pushback about, isn't this going to cannibalize our sales? And look, at the end of the day, I've always believed that channel conflict's a good thing. I mean, it actually means you're making a mark, you're making a dent in the market. I mean, most startups have the problem that just nobody knows about them. So, I mean, having 100% of nothing is still nothing. So with with, an OEM strategic partnership, I always try and create the deals so that there's some sort of restriction, there's some sort of boundaries that protect the direct sales space from what the OEM is going to do. So maybe it has to be bundled together with their product. Perhaps it's some sort of restricted version product. Still a lot of value, but it's restricted in some way so that what the OEM is doing in seeding the market and creating lots of opportunities, is creating a lot of upsell opportunity for the direct sales people. So every deal is different, but I'm always looking for that boundary, the definition of the water's edge, if you will. Kind of what can the OEM do? Where can our direct sales team step in and do something that's of higher value?
Totally, because that initial seed use case, so to speak, could be something where the sales team might be like, hey, I'm passing up $100,000, opportunity. But the reality is, do you want to try to sell a $100,000 opportunity into an account that's cold, or to an account that's utilized part of the solution in terms of their day-to-day? You have the brand recognition, and then you get to go pitch the full value. So I think it's about zooming out. And I have to go back to what you said, because I don't think I've ever heard someone say this quote, is that channel conflict is a good thing.
Yeah, please. I want to double click into that. Please. I would love to hear more about that.
Normally, partner leaders spend a lot of their time debating this point, right? And trying to eliminate channel conflict. There's so many cycles spent on that. And perhaps you have a different, by what you just said, you have a different perspective. It's maybe there is a way to kind of empower partner leaders to lean into that statement, to be like, look, this is a good thing. These are champagne problems.
Yeah, it is a topic. In my experience, it gets debated too much time around the management team table. And guys, it's like, let's go make something happen first. What a lovely problem to have is that we're here in 6 months or a year, and we're now having to figure out deal registration programs because we're too successful in the marketplace. So I just often think it just comes from a lot of fear and not in reality. The reality of channel conflict happening to me doesn't happen that often in reality. So of course, we're being smart about it. We're thinking about, okay, how are we segmenting the market, our OEM, what boundaries are going to put around them, what restrictions. So there's still a tremendous amount of value, but that OEM partner is serving us in the sense that they're opening up the market, they're seeding the market. And, our job is to be pedaling faster than the big elephants and coming up with the next innovation. So our direct sales team always has something of higher value to sell and to offer. And to your point, Jared, it's all about, would you rather have a warm account where we're already a trusted entity, or you're going to want to be starting cold? And I think everybody knows it's way better to have already a warm relationship, a trusted relationship. It's much more effective to sell from that perspective than from straight out in the cold.
Right. So moving kind of from that, I think you call it the magic moment. I call it the black swan, aha moment in the book, into let's assume that you have decent buy-in on the management side. The partners, their ears are tuned up, and you kind of have the business case. You're kind of going into the contracting component, and there's very little out there for strategic partnership templates. The reason why, content-wise, I've over-indexed on the business case is that I often feel like 90% of the job to be done is there. But even if you do get it done there, I feel like the management team wants to know, what could this thing look like in terms of key contract terms to kind of think about. You lay out some kind of frameworks and some parameters in the book, but what might be some key takeaways from that kind of contracting component that might help the management team understand, hey, here's the bounds that we're going to be talking about when we approach this partner, that makes them at ease to be like, okay, we're not going to give away the farm and 80% of our revenue. Maybe kind of give some of the context for how you think about contracting and setting the stage before you try to put these terms together.
Well, one of the first things I try and do is I try to have a business value discussion, kind of a market opportunity discussion with the other side. So share with me, what do you see as the best case, the most amount of success in terms of sales dollars, number of net new customers, number of licenses sold, And what do you think is the minimum or worst case? And so now you've got this range of value, right? You kind of set your low water mark, and you've got the wildly successful mark, and then you got your goalposts. So you know, okay, hopefully it's going to fall somewhere in the middle there. So that's the first thing. Is I think it's really important just to establish some goalposts of what's the range from worst case, minimum we're going to do, to, of course, the total blue sky, things are really rocking out of the park. And I think that's really important, because then you can start to dial in a little bit more about where the sweet spot is. The second thing is about exclusive. If there's one hot button topic I have, is never, ever do exclusive deals. Is a lot of pressure, especially when you're a small startup and you're dealing with the big elephant. You're going to get asked, but it's really easy to position away from that. And you just say, look, we're a small independent software company. We're lean and mean. We're nimble. And to be a viable independent company, we have to be able to win more customers. It's a good thing for you, because you don't want to have us dependent on just you. And ultimately, an exclusive is by the company. That's really what it is.
Let me hop in real quick on that point. Michele, I know you want to ask a question. When you say exclusivity, what if you could get mutual exclusivity? What if you can prevent that partner from building, buying, or partnering with anyone else? And they're like the big sumo of the space, the big elephant. Is there, would you go, maybe at that point, exclusivity for a year, like the first year or something like that, would be worthwhile if you can get them to? Because I've done that before. And really, in the first year, I couldn't go build another alliance anyways, but I got to stop them from doing it, which was way more valuable. In that case, would you say that's an exception?
I would. I wouldn't go a year, but I have done deals where I've compromised and said, okay, let's do something for 3, 4, 5 months, maybe 6 months, with the idea that there's no way that these guys could launch something else in that time frame. I've also done it where it's been restricted. So instead of saying nothing in 6 months, it's like, how about just these 2 or 3 hot button competitive partners, where it would create, massive turmoil for your management team if there was an announcement with your dreaded evil competitor, a month after we did our announcements. So those kinds of things, I think, are places where you can compromise. But beyond that, I think you're trying to be pretty stingy on how much you give on that kind of exclusivity. It's usually a bad thing, not a good thing.
Right. So you can call out specific companies that you would not want them to partner with as part of the agreement. So I wanted to ask, so Mark, if you get to a place where the joint value proposition makes sense for both sides within those bands, like you were mentioning, what about, and I think you talk about this in your book as well, like the ability to get somebody active and over that honeymoon phase, and like, how do you keep the partnership going? But within the initial agreement, what if you can't perform, right? What's the exit strategy if this isn't the right partnership? Once you get into the weeds of actually diving in together.
Yeah. Well, first thing, Michele, I really want to call out, and I did it right in my opening pages of my book. I tell this story, and this is a true story that happened to me when I was at Crystal Services, the makers of Crystal Reports, a report writing software. And we just inked this big deal with Borland DBase, and we were so excited. And then, we bet the company on this whole thing, and then they announced that they had bought ReportSmith, our evil number one competitor. And we were stunned. We were like, okay, how is this possible? And so, what you realize is you can't put all your eggs in one basket. You have to take a portfolio approach. And to some degree, you got to assume that it's not going to go perfectly. There's going to be some hiccups. Now, that's an extreme hiccup. Yeah. That's like the worst case hiccup. But every deal I've done, and I've done over 200 OEM deals, it never goes as planned. There's delays, there's market disruptions, competitive things that happen, execution problems, delays in their product cycle. I guarantee you one thing, there will be some hiccups to the plan. And so you ink the deal right away. I think it's about trying to be agile and trying to figure out how you're going to adjust. I call it tap dancing. How are you going to adjust to the deal? And so you may have signed up some pretty aggressive gives in terms of development cycles, but there's going to be things that happen pretty quickly where there's opportunities to kind of renegotiate or do some gives and gets to find a place where things are working or adjusting to the new realities.
So to that point, right, the business is always going to act in their best interest, right? Whatever that means.
Right.
So how do you, and maybe this is diving into like once you're already signed and the partnership's kind of moving along, what strategy do you have around continuing to keep aligned with that business and make sure that that original value we decided on initially is still the same value, and how do we keep ourselves on that path?
That's a great question. And one of the techniques is insist on having, probably a monthly check-in. I think an executive check-in, especially in the early days, first 6 months or so forth, have that executive check-in, identify the senior executives on both sides, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that's in the weeds. And, there's going to be problems. And then once a month, okay, check in. Here's the value that both sides agreed to. Is this still true on both sides? Is there anything that's changed on your side or our side that, needs to be acknowledged or called out or adjusted? So that monthly, at an absolute minimum, quarterly check-in. Quarterly is, quarter can be a long time, especially in the early formative stages of the partnership, to really validate, honestly, like, how are we doing? Were you happy? Were you not happy? For the startup, it often gets frustrating. They're dealing with all the bureaucracy of a big company. I mean, drive you crazy. 3 people from the startup side, and it's usually pretty senior management people, executives, and they're dealing with a team of 30 on the other side, and it gets bogged down in the bureaucracy.
Right, because the startup is so used to moving quickly, where they're finding on the other side there's a lot of more red tape and a lot more hurdles to jump.
Right, exactly.
In the on the back, there's a quote, Mark, and it's from Geoffrey Moore, which Crossing the Chasm has probably been the book I've evangelized more to friends and colleagues and family, even like my wife, more than anyone. Like, it's mandatory reading for anyone that really wants to figure out markets. It's amazing how, Jeff's narrative in the 90s when he wrote it is still true today. He left you a quote, right? He said that, you got to read this. It's packed with practical examples, and tactics. And I feel like strategic partnerships can kind of be viewed within the lens of Crossing the Chasm. And what I mean by that is, in the early adopter phase, I feel like you probably should not be trying to nail that strategic partner. Like, you need to have the social proof and let's figure out the franchise and what's working, what's not. But then Crossing the Chasm feels like that point where it's like, we want to nail this next vertical or this next horizontal, this next persona. Do you feel like the strategic partnering narrative might fit hand in glove with Crossing the Chasm? Is like, I almost view strategic partnering as the bridge, the cheat code to cross the chasm, where a lot of companies fail. Is that useful framing, helpful for companies to think about? Or maybe I'm like way off base and that I'm just trying to tie together something I'm geeking out on with you in one of my favorite books.
Well, I challenge you on that. It might be a little bit different than you think, but it's a great question. When I was sitting down for breakfast with Geoffrey Moore to talk to him about the book and get his endorsement for the book, and I was very fortunate. I had the opportunity to work with Geoffrey Moore when I was with Crystal. He would come up to Vancouver, Canada, and meet with the management team on a quarterly basis, and he would go through our strategy, and he was an incredibly inspirational guy to work with, and he made us think outside the box. And when I was sitting down with him at breakfast and talking about the book, he said, Mark, is there a certain stage of company where strategic partnerships are kind of the right place to engage? Is it seed? Is it Series A? Is it Series B? And what I answered was, I don't think there is any point where it's too soon. And by that, what I mean is, it's a competitive thing. When you're talking about strategic partnerships with the big guys, they're only going to pick one strategic partner typically. They're going to pick their favorite, if you will, they think is the most innovative or the best, smartest visionary that's going to move into the to the goal line. And I've seen that happen obviously as late stages, Series C or whenever, but usually it happens a lot earlier. It usually happens once there's a demo, once there's some early customers that have validated it. And so what I often share with CEOs is, how would you feel if tomorrow morning you're opening up your inbox and you read that Elephant Partner, say Salesforce, just announces a strategic partnership with your number one arch nemesis competitor, how does that make you feel? If that feels like a gut punch to the stomach, then that should tell you something. It should tell you something that you've got to be to the table earlier. And if you're not at the table, like how is the big strategic company supposed to know you even exist? How are you supposed to learn about what they see as valuable and important? So I believe the earlier that you can get to that proverbial table, the better, because at a minimum, you can get your name known to them. And I've never left a meeting with, senior product managers where I didn't learn a whole bunch about the market and about their customers and how they think about the market that gave me ideas about how to refine the pitch and make it better.
Okay, well, I'll accept your argument with me. I was kind of sitting here thinking like, I'm not sure that this is necessarily the right perspective, because I think you really do need to nail your core customer, the early adopter, and then cross the chasm. But I think that's a great question that you asked around, to ask your CEO, to ask yourself, what if your number one partner, right? A potential partner with your competition. Like, what a simple framework, what an easy question to ask. And then it's like, maybe we don't want to risk that. Maybe it really is that important early on.
Yeah.
The challenge is still the same. You have to make sure that you have the value there. So if you don't have the value there, then it's like, look, who cares if your number one competition partners with your number one, strategic, because you probably have an existential crisis, right? Not necessarily
you're going to be out of business soon.
Crisis, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I mean, and every startup has, most, I would think, by virtue of having raised money, gotten investors on board, they have a compelling idea. They might need to refine it. They might need to take it to the next level. But every CEO should have a vision that they can cast that should be exciting and compelling. And if it's not, what better place to learn from these large ISVs that spend millions of dollars on analysts and on research and customer research. They have a lot of insights, and so they can give you some really valuable feedback on your pitch, what's resonating and what's not.
You get to learn from the market, and I think that perspective is insanely valuable. It's what's interesting is that as you mature, so if you're in the early startup organizations, right, there is typically no corporate strategy role. But as you get bigger and bigger, that corporate strategy role typically has, I normally see like the purview of partnerships, like alliances, partner channel, et cetera, because that organization, that line of business or, overlay to the other lines typically has the best point of view of the market. So early on, you can get caught in the trap of just being stuck in the customer. And that sounds great. Like you want to put the customer at the center of everything you do. You have to. But if you're doing that at the expense of like what's actually happening in the market one layer beyond, you can actually get in this trap where you're just trying to like solve for problems and firefight where the market is going a completely different direction. It's valuable, if nothing else, for those types of insights. Like how are the big people thinking about this? Because they have corporate strategy. They have a perspective on the market that you probably want to understand prior to anything, just building that relationship.
We should have a chief market officer, right, Jared? Let's focus on the market. We've said it before.
Yeah, actually, you know what? I threw this out, and actually a couple of people have responded to me on LinkedIn about this. Mark, I'd love your take. I think in the future of ecosystem, have people on like Jay McBain from Forrester, some really smart folks like Avanish Sahai, board of directors at HubSpot, Google, ServiceNow, Salesforce. And I've thought like, look, if ecosystem and partnering really is perhaps one of the biggest levers in this McBain calls the decade of the ecosystem, that how do we align everything together from the perspective of the market? And I said, the new CMO should actually be chief market officer, where sales, marketing, and partnerships rolls into her, because you need those things to work in concert, not from the perspective of how you work with the customers and how you reach customers, but what is the market point of view? And then how do we kind of work together within that? What's your take on that? Do you feel like the misalignment that perhaps might exist inherently in marketing, sales, partnerships might sit better under one that kind of has that purview of market first, us second?
Well, what you got me thinking about as you were speaking was product-led growth companies.
Right.
When I was CEO of Partnerpedia, we didn't have a big marketing budget, but we had this concept of creating enterprise app stores. So kind of taking the Steve Jobs idea of app stores for consumers and how can we apply that to the enterprise? And, we were thinking of how do we get this new category known in the market? And we realized, well, let's just make it so anyone can come to the website and quickly spin up their own private branded enterprise app store. And we'd go through the log list to see, who had requested a demo. And one day I look and it's Coca-Cola. Wow. Okay. That's a big company with a big brand. And, we followed up with the person who had requested the demo, and it was an incredible conversation. They had really thought through how they wanted to use the product. They had done their market research. And ultimately they were giving us new ideas about uses and features for the enterprise app store that they would find extremely valuable, that we hadn't even thought of. So in answer to your question about could sales and partnering fit underneath the CMO? I mean, absolutely. If it's this product-led growth, then you might really be thinking about it first from the perspective of how can you have this amazing out-of-the-box experience for customers where they can discover the product on their own, where they might also be able to give features and suggestions of where the market is, where the sweet spot is.
Right. That feedback loop, I feel like it's really hard to describe to people. And I feel like I only had this realization halfway through the podcast. We're coming up on the first formal, actually we just crossed the first year that, it's had this, I saw in Riverside today that's 60 plus hours of recording and, obviously the editing and the combos and the pre-calls it's not the same to understand the customer as it is to understand the market, right? So you can say, hey, we sell to X type of companies and Y vertical, right? And this is the, Z horizontal or persona that we sell to and we serve, and we're solving this pain point. That's still not the same as having a perspective on the market. And
I couldn't agree with you more. The interesting thing is, when you're leading a startup, you just want any customers, right? So, you land this customer and then you land the second customer and then land the third customer. And then I'm looking and going, oh my gosh, I got 3 customers, but they're 3 different value propositions. They're 3 different use cases. And I can only build one, the product team can only build one product. I don't have enough resource to be building 3 different things. So I think that's where kind of this combination, if I understand your comment correctly, is that, yeah, you got to focus on a customer and satisfying those customers, but it's only when you step back a little bit and you look at the broader market customer segmentation that you can understand, okay, what are we going after here? And I think you have to have a pretty good thesis of what that customer segmentation is, go test and validate that, and then iterate that. So I think that's kind of that combination of, bottoms up and top down approach.
Yeah, be able to take the customer's needs and what they're asking for now, but also show them the way and show them what the future looks like based on the market fit, right? So being able to kind of lead them to water, if you will.
Absolutely.
Mark, you kind of end the book with talking about this is a game to win, and I love that.
Love that.
I mean, I'm slightly competitive. Don't win many medals at much.
Jared's very competitive. He's very competitive.
Very competitive in that the way that you end the book is look, this is a game you can win. And I think of a lot of people think about partnering as hey, I want to build this partner program, or that's been my task. But when it comes to strategic partnering, I really feel like if you're not first, you're last, kind of Talladega Nights style, you really have to be in that position where you're there to win. And right. if you're not going to win, you don't have the bandwidth to be oh, I have 2 strategic partners in this space. No, you have to win. And the 2 major alliances that I've quote unquote won, where it's got us to the next phase, I've actually come into that partnership negotiation and saying, you don't know me, you don't know us, but in 1 year, I will be your most strategic partner, and we're different than everybody else. Now, I did this before reading your book. I just thought this has to be right. True. And that set us apart immediately from every conversation. Not everyone was approaching the chief strategy officer or CEO or CMO saying, no, in 1 year, I will be number 1. And I have a path to show you how. How important do you think that mindset is? Because like I hadn't heard that or seen that like you have to be number one, but I've always felt that way. And I love how you end the book that way. Maybe some closing comments on like, you know, what it's like to win there and why you need to have that competitive edge, or, you know, if you can't go in it to be number one, then don't do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, it's that audacity and the boldness to be swinging for the fences and shooting for number one that gets you to the table in the first place. And, you know, the other thing I've learned through being part of numerous exit M&A events is the unfair spoils go to the first and second player. No one can even barely remember the third or fourth or fifth player. So, yeah, I think it's that audacity and the boldness that, you know, is important. I mean, you put yourself in the shoes of the chief product officer or the VP of product management at the big elephant company. What's going to capture their interest? You know, someone is saying kind of a boring story of I can do this Me Too thing, or someone who goes in there and says, look, I've got a really big idea here that can really transform things. It's that big idea that's going to generate the excitement and enthusiasm that's going to carry you through. People want to deal and associate with winners. So absolutely. I think swinging for the fences is really important. That's what energizes the conversation. It's what differentiates you from your competition.
It's in our title, Partner Up, right? So, you know, partnering up, it doesn't mean that we're
partner up, partner big.
Right, exactly. Partner to win. That'll be the methodology that we develop that I'm always talking about in terms of maturity models. But Mark, people can find you at CEO Quest on LinkedIn, Twitter. Tell the folks where they can find you, because you're continually putting out more good content and thoughts on this space. Love the experience that you've had and kind of sharing with us today. Where can the folks find you?
Yeah, they can find me at ceoquest.com. They can find me on LinkedIn and the LinkedIn group Partner Strategy Network, and they can check out the podcast. And you know, welcome people to take a look at the book, The Art of Strategic Partnering: Dancing with Elephants. How to partner with industry titans without getting crushed.
And that's available on Amazon. So like for those of you,
on Amazon, yeah.
Here's my shameless plug for all of you that are listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, etc. You can also check us out on YouTube. PartnerUpPodcast.com. You'll see the videos. You can go subscribe there and get to see that we were actually holding the book. I actually ordered this from Amazon. You can too. So don't forget, if you love the stuff that we're bringing to you, because Michele and I, you know, just doing this to learn and be curious, learning machines ourselves. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Like, subscribe on YouTube. Michele, it's 5 stars only, right?
5 stars. I won't accept anything less. So do it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mark, it's been a pleasure. Can't wait to continue the conversation with you. I feel like I'm going to come geek out with you on your podcast too, and we'll be tuning in, and we'll definitely have you back on the pod.
That'd be great. Thank you, Jared. Thank you, Michele.
All right, Partner Up. See y'all next time.